Israeli tanks are positioned outside.
Media shapes our perspective of current events and society at large. Whether it is a conversation about what group of people owns a certain type of food or territorial rights to land, everyone is bound to have their own opinion. While we hope that our media can be unbiased to produce the most accurate portrayal of the news, bias is inevitable.
There is no way for media and news to be unbiased. And I think, if you'll forgive me being philosophical for a moment, Kant laid this out. Because we process everything through our senses, because we don't know the world as it is, we can't possibly represent the world as it really is. And even if we did, we wouldn't recognize it.
Everything we create has a degree of bias. And I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing. I think we all have perspective.
Media is a great vehicle for ideology. And by ideology, I mean the kinds of narratives that cultures or governments or families or sports teams or any group of people, the kinds of narratives that they tell about themselves.
Different regimes have used manipulation of media to legitimize actions otherwise seen as immoral or inhumane. Oppressed regions protesting for their sovereignty in the international community fall victim to these manipulations. For example, the Chinese government refuses to recognize Tibetan autonomy, and the Israeli government refuses to remove settlements and soldiers from land designated to Palestine by the UN Oslo Accords agreements.
A thinker I always think about in this context is Machiavelli, who was one of the first people to really think about the difference between appearances and reality in political terms. That if you want to be a successful leader, you have to obscure who you really are and what you really are. You need to craft a very carefully shaped persona for yourself that is your public face. And what you really are doesn't matter.
According to the Chinese, the Dalai Lama incites violent protests and does not support religious freedom. They argue that Tibet has always been a Chinese territory, and the changes that the Chinese bring are beneficial for Tibet. The Israeli narrative paints a picture of suicide bombings and attacks to their people by the Palestinians. They are labeled terrorists, and the justification is that the Israeli military is not occupying Palestine, but are there to protect Israeli citizens.
It's not enough to be accurate. Emerging technologies have created an environment where media is now expected to be a contested arena.
Today, there are many ways to use film production to change emotions and narratives. Specifically techniques, different media representations all serve to shape the viewer's perspective.
When you're filming something, if you decide to film handheld and have a slightly shake your camera, a little more run and gun documentary style, that has a certain emotional connotation to it. If you decide to film something with, much more sweeping, cinematic, smooth, majestic camera movements, that has a very different feel to it. You can take what is essentially raw materials and turn them into something completely other. When you're taking the words that you recorded someone speaking, if you're taking someone's testimony or you're filming a live event, you've got that record. But just the act of filming it is putting it into a certain perspective.
These techniques paired with the villainization of oppressed groups, suppression of media coverage in conflict-ridden areas, propaganda that characterizes the state's benign intentions, all allow governments to continue their abuses of human rights and illegal occupation. By highlighting isolated incidents of violence, the public opinion towards the Palestinians changes dramatically. Peaceful movements such as BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions end up going widely unnoticed, especially in Western media. Whether it is the refusal of major media outlets to report on certain topics, the bias of information, or limited historical context, there are many ways to distort an opinion on any conflict. In this modern age of information, we must be mindful of being misguided by the representation of media output.
We cannot reasonably expect anything like objectivity from the media because we can't reasonably expect it from ourselves. Media has changed, but our brains have not. And we're still, I think, scrambling to adjust our consumption habits to deal with our emerging technologies.